If you're in construction, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the Constructive Behaviors podcast. I'm your host, Barb Allen. I'm a woman with decades of experience in the construction industry, and most of it on the job site. I know how rewarding this industry can be, but like you, I also know that we could improve. Let's work together to make changes from the inside out. Today's guest is someone who began the development of his strategic partnership skills in his first role as the transportation planner of special events liaison for the New York City Department of Transportation. Where in this role, he served as a liaison between the New York City DOT and all the other agencies that required to coordinate citywide events in New York City. Michael Rieger has continued his curiosity journey through many different roles throughout his career as he developed his ability to create these strategic partnerships. Today, Michael is a coach, consultant, author, speaker, and project management expert, leading AEC business strategies with his wife as they work together to develop more effective leaders, communicators, relationship builders, and problem solvers. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you for having me. It'll be exciting, I think.
I think so too. I think so Michael and I met through LinkedIn, and we had a conversation a few weeks prior to the recording of this, just to kind of get to know each other, because we do some similar things as far as building people, right? Like, we focus now on building people, and we focused on building other things in our career prior to this. So let's talk a little about that first. What is your trajectory been in the construction and engineering realm of our industry?
So when I hear you talk about the work I did at New York City DOT, it seems like a lifetime ago, right? It literally is sort of 30 plus years ago. But starting there and then sort of launching forward, that idea about working with people, understanding both the technical and the people side of things, the value that brings to an organization, and the ability to have the conversations with both halves of the industry, and be a little bit of the translator in the middle, right? Because that often is where we kind of go off the rails in terms of our projects. And maybe that's just sort of the communication styles, but so I always sort of felt most comfortable in that kind of a role, understanding the technical, not really wanting to be too much in the weeds there, and understanding the people side, and recognizing that if we can develop people more fully, we can help our organizations succeed more. We can help our teams be more successful. It's just sort of a win-win all the way around. Clients, vendors, whoever, you're starting to look at the industry in a much more holistic way.
What's interesting to me is that you said you realized you didn't really like to get into the technical weeds of things. You lean toward the people, but correct me if I'm wrong, your degree is in engineering.
My degree is in
construction management.
Construction management. So my degree is not in engineering.
Okay.
Because I chose not to take 3 semesters of calculus and a semester of differential equations.
Yes. Yes. That is funny, because I maybe have mentioned this on another podcast, but so I started out in college. I was going after business administration, realized I didn't want to sit behind a desk forever. Then I went to I was going to be a high school math teacher, and it was exactly that. It was like Calc 3 or DiffyQ or something. And I was finally getting my first D ever. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not doing this. And then I stumbled upon construction management. So similar background.
Yeah.
With that, for sure. But I love that you so quickly in your career decided that you wanted to focus more on the people aspect. But how did you get into construction in general? Is your family from construction?
My family had no touch, right? There was no touch within my family in construction.
Really?
I grew up in the suburbs, and at a time where right? The high school guidance counselors were not advocating that construction was a path,
Right.
particularly in suburban school districts in New York. It probably hasn't changed a whole lot in the last 40, 45 years,
Yeah.
which is a problem for our industry, which is maybe a topic for a different day. But so I started to go to school for sciences, and I was going to go to dental school because I was always good with my hands, right? So I was the kid who was playing with Legos, erector sets, Lincoln logs. I was building things as I got older, and my dad would do projects around the house. He would teach me how to do that kind of stuff. I was much more patient than he was, so I ended up very much taking the lead on some of those things as well. Um, and the thing I was most successful at was failing out of college in 3 semesters because I hated the sciences. My parents thought I'd go to dental school because we'd be a good fit. I hated the sciences, failed out in 3 semesters. It took me another year and a half to kind of figure out, oh, this is kind of where I want to be, and then sort of things launched from there. So I don't necessarily know that I chose the industry as much as the I found a way into the industry, and then our industry is so big and so varied that my natural tendencies started to come out once I started to work.
I noticed as I looked through your trajectory as you move through different positions, you really each of your positions spent considerable time focused on the people aspect, focusing on figuring out. Like I noticed in the early 2000s, you were a business manager for HNTB. And one of the things that you wrote on there was your responsibilities were conducting internal engagements with staff on workplace and HR concerns. And that to me is that goes back to that curiosity muscle, right? You're learning how to figure out what do people think are concerns? What's not good about the workplace? What are the HR concerns? And you have to start doing those, you asking those questions and sitting down in groups or round tables to really get the answers. And only someone that has that curiosity muscle and wants to develop it can be successful in those positions. And each position on your resume, you can see that is something that you listed. So it's something that you've truly enjoyed.
Yeah, and I think so. For me, there is a part of this which is leveraging the silence, right? So it's taking that curiosity, and the example you cited when I was at HNTB, I was working for a remote office. I was in New York. The office was in Pennsylvania. I had a great relationship with their office manager, and was doing some project work for them. And he was sort of relating to me that there were some. He wasn't quite sure what was the problem, and the staff was willing to have a conversation with me that they wouldn't be willing to have with him,
Yep.
which is typical. I mean, we think about from an engineering company perspective or a construction company perspective, it's very often easier to bring in somebody from the outside because people are willing to have those conversations because there's that one step removed from their boss.
Right.
So in that circumstance, and I think it's probably been um, that kind of a situation, throughout my career of being willing to have those conversations, facilitate the conversations, being willing to ask the questions, and then step back and hear what people have to say. Because I think that in many cases, people are too um, their first inclination is to speak, and as
Mhm.
long as they're talking, they are right. They are sort of in that expert role, as opposed to asking the question, really understanding what the issue is, and then helping them develop a plan to
Yeah.
move forward.
Yeah, what I love about what you're saying is when I read through your LinkedIn profile, I noticed, and I don't know if this is apparent to you or not, but when in your earlier roles, You use words like supervised people, managed people. From 92 to 2010, those are the words you used. In 2010, in that role, you changed the words and you started using coach and mentor people. And I found that really interesting because I tell audiences that I probably sucked at people management for the first 10 years. And it's because I wasn't taught how to manage people. I was taught how to do my job. And then we promote doers to managers and we don't give them those skills necessary. And so you learn it on your own, right? And it was about 10 years for me before I think I really started to become good at leading people. And I love seeing that in your LinkedIn that it is because you start out like, yes, I'm a supervisor, I manage people, and then you get to a point in your career where you're like, wait, the best way to manage people is to coach them. It's to mentor them. That's how you get the best team. So, um, thoughts on that?
Yeah. Uh, well, right, it's the same kind of thing. I never would have picked up on it, right? So I'm glad you did because now I have another little tidbit to stick in my back pocket to refer back to. Um, but yeah, we don't as an industry, whether it's construction or engineering or architecture, um, we don't do a good job of promoting the that sort of coaching, mentoring concept. It is we hire people who are good at the technical skills. We need them to build something. We need them to manage projects. Right? They check all the boxes from a perspective of what are their technical skills. And at a certain point in their career, they get promoted and they are completely at a loss because they've never been given access, exposure, training to how do you really start to put teams together? How do you start to deal with the conflict? How do you start to deal with clients? How do you get clients to really understand the value that you're providing as a consultant or a construction firm, right, wherever it may be? And so we're not good at that. And it came to me more so, so 2010. I'm just trying to think where the sort of break was. You get to a certain point in your career where you can start to do those things
Mhm.
because you've got the experience and you've got some of that some of the scars along the way where you can start to where you can start to provide that sort of context. um yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. And for me, all throughout my career, I was always the baby face in the room, right? I'd be in a room at 30, 32, 35 with primarily men, still kind of that way, in their 50s and 60s, and they look at me at the end of the table and go, "What could this guy possibly be offering?"
Mhm.
Right? Right? Doesn't have gray hair. He has all his hair, and it's not gray. So, so where's the value? And their their perspective was sort of an we'll call it an old school perspective, right? Where the foreman or the superintendent of the job site, their communication style was described in terms of the volume and how many four-letter words they used, as opposed to actually how much they were able to get out of their teams from a
That's right.
productivity perspective.
That's right. I think that we still struggle to get away from what a what the qualities of a good leader are because there's still that expectation of and not from everyone, but I think it's still an unconscious bias that man, this is what a superintendent looks like, sounds like, says, does, and you can be just as effective and look like me, right? And I didn't yell, I didn't scream, I didn't throw things, I did cuss, I still cuss, and I don't. I'm not sure if that's just because I like it or because I felt like I had to. But yeah, I think it's hard to change those, but it's definitely time to change those perceptions.
And I think the sort of bringing it around full circle, the idea around curiosity, um, that's where that curiosity really comes into play. So I did my MBA when my wife was pregnant with twins, was on bed rest for the last 3 months of her pregnancy.
Ugh.
So I was working full time, running a house full time, and then my kids were born. So it's just like it was like 2 years of chaos. But for me, for that MBA program, the probably the most instructive course I took was organizational behavior. And organizational behavior is really around how do you squeeze more juice out of your lemon or your orange or
Mhm.
whatever your fruit metaphor is. How do you get more out of your team? Because once you're paying them a reasonable wage, what motivates them, what gets them to get up early in the morning, right? We are an industry that starts early, physically taxing, in the elements, for the most part. So what do you do to motivate people to get them to deliver the best that they can? And so that curiosity piece is really very important because you're starting to then go individually, right? It's not a collective at a certain point. You have to start to go individually. What does this person need? What is this person? How do they need to be addressed or communicated with in order for them to hear the message, buy into the message, and then to execute on the message? And it's a very individualized approach. And I think that curiosity piece is really important, and the willingness to ask them, right? Too often we make assumptions. We don't ask people, right? What is the best way for me to communicate with you?
Mhm.
If we have a problem, what's the best way for us to have a conversation and resolve it, right?
Mhm.
So we don't do those things in a routine way. Most industries don't either. It's not
Right.
we are not special in that regard. But
Right.
I think the curiosity piece is um, really comes into play there because you're starting to ask the questions and letting them respond, and as a result you're building a much more solid relationship. And I think that that's the piece that the curiosity helps you do if you're leading a team or you're managing a company or you're whatever the case may be. It's about relationships. Um, and I think that the more we can strengthen those relationships, as a leader, we've got to be curious and we've got to be able to deliver to our teams in a way that they need us to deliver them,
Yeah.
as opposed to the way we want to deliver them.
Well, and I think for this conversation, we want to turn that from focusing on the teams to focusing on women in construction and what motivates men to be interested in increasing the success of women in construction. What motivates them to listen and to buy in to what we're trying to do, then, and why women are beneficial to job sites, and developing that curiosity muscle within them to ask those questions, right? Whether it's from why did you get into the industry to why do you stay, or why are you frustrated? Or I just think back on how many times I look back and think, man, if somebody would have just asked me, they could have learned. They could have learned what I was going there. Why are you so upset about this? And then I could explain from my perspective, this is what just happened, right? And I think,
Mhm.
for example, um, so many times there are well-intentioned men in our industry that want to help, and they see I'm going to use air quotes here, injustice. They see a woman being treated unfairly and they want to fix it. And I appreciate that desire. The way they go about it is not always the solution. It's not always the way that solves it. And instead, sometimes it makes it worse. And like I have said, when I've spoken to the Society for Human Resource Managers, no offense, but we're not coming to you. As women in construction, we rarely come to HR directors with our problems. We know they want to help us, but as women in HR who have not been in our shoes, you don't understand when women or men in HR, sorry, don't understand when you go and say, hey, this is happening, we need to improve this, what trickle down happens back to women, right? Like, so instead of a man immediately reacting, "Hey, that wasn't right. We need to do this," or going to HR and saying, "Hey, this happened. Somebody needs to help her." It's going to her first with the curiosity and saying, "I didn't like that. That made me uncomfortable. You didn't speak up. What can I do to help?" Right? I remember one time I was emceeing a panel of men in the industry, and we were talking about women in construction, and one of them told a story about how he had seen an injustice with one of his female employees in the field, and so he immediately went about, like, pulling people aside saying, "That's not okay, blah, 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 blah." And then he said, "I went home and I was telling my wife I was so proud of myself and what I'd done, and she just looked at me." And as he was telling the story, he looked at me and goes, "She looked at me the way you're looking at me." And I'm like, "Yeah, it was complete horror because I can't, I get that you thought that was a solution, but this is what that probably just did. X, Y, and Z." And he's like, "I didn't think about that." And that's okay. You know what?
Yeah,
That just means come ask. Be curious about all aspects of it. I mean, as a man in construction, in the construction industry, what advice would you have um, to women to help them get men to be more curious or to be more comfortable asking, because there's probably a lot of curiosity, but a lot of men probably aren't comfortable asking. What can we as women do to make men more comfortable asking us those questions?
it's a it, it's a great question, and I think that perhaps there's a need to separate because we're still a 90-10 industry, right? Give or take.
Yep.
Um, you know, but when you start to think about that 10%, less than half of that 10% is working out in the field.
Yep.
So the experience that the 4% who are working on job sites, who are working in the trades, are having is probably very different than the 6% or so who are working in the offices, who are, and I will generalize here, but for the most part, that 6% who are working in construction in the office are in roles that are accounting, human resources. There's probably that 4% that's working in the field. There's probably another 3% or so of the entire industry who are in project management, dealing with those kinds of things. The women who are working on job sites in the trades, uh, it's a part of it is about team building, right? So if you're leading a team, it's about getting that team cohesion where people understand, right? They look at each other as human beings as opposed to men and women, right? Because if I'm on a job site and I see something happen, and I appreciate your story about the horrified look because I've gotten that myself, where my daughter, who's 23, will say, "I don't stop trying to fix it," right? Just like, right now, I'm a coach. Um, you know, I'm a dad first and a coach second, so to speak. And so you want to help your kids and like you
Sure.
want to try and fix things. Um, the role is not to fix. The role is to give your team, the individuals, the tools they need to resolve things for themselves. So there are things that happen on job sites, like the example you gave, where he saw something that was out of bounds from his perspective, but he never went to the person who he thought was offended to say, "Is this a problem?
Mm-hmm.
Do we need to address this?"
Mm-hmm.
Because there are things that get said on job sites that not as much anymore, not as much as they did when I first started my career. But uh, many of the women who are working on job sites, they are tough, accomplished. skilled, and they don't necessarily want or need special treatment, right? But you need to, right? It's bringing them into the fold to say, is this a problem? Where is the line where we need to start to address this? So as a leader, it is, before you go into action, have those conversations. And I think that, as those things happen, the 96% of the men who are on that job site are going to see that, oh, okay, right there, here's where the bright line is. Here's where the teasing is just teasing. The team dynamic is just the team dynamic, and here's where we need to be right here. So we now know here's where that line is. Um, but part of that comes from building cohesive teams where there is, for lack of a better term, it's the Amy Edmondson concept of psychological safety, right? There has to be some safety within that team where things can get said without it becoming, going from 0 to 11
Mm-hmm.
in a split second. And I think that to build that safety within the team to requires a leader to really start to understand where all those levers are and where all the pain points are. And that only comes from asking the question, right? So ask before action, I would say.
And I think for women, if you can figure out who in the group seems to be the most open to helping you, um, opening that door of communication to them to say, hey, have you ever, would you be interested in knowing how things are seen from my lens? Because I'm interested in seeing how things are seen from your lens. And I say this as an example, something that happens for women on job sites and women in offices alike is we can be standing around a cutting table in the field, or we can be sitting around a boardroom in the office, and a woman has an idea and it's crickets or it's ignored. And many times we leave that room or that saw table or whatever, and some guy will come up to us afterwards and be like, I totally agreed with what you said. That's the kind of guy, like, that's backstage help, which, okay, at least he supports, but we need front stage help. And so that's the kind of guy that I recommend that reach out to and say, hey, I appreciate you saying that, but there are ways that you could be, that you could help me with this. Would you be interested in hearing from my perspective? Because I want to hear from yours. Like, what keeps
Mhm.
you from speaking up and saying that in the room in front of the other men? Why are you just saying it to me? And then you can hear, like, you're not scolding him. You're wanting to understand what is keeping him from speaking up in the meeting. Because then once you're curious about what's holding him back, he will reciprocate most likely that curiosity to understand your point as well. And you can begin to work together to change a team dynamic. But
Mhm.
many times, if the leader isn't the person leading that dynamic change, as a female, find a guy in that group that you think can be that lead for that change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and I think that there's, and I've seen it throughout my career that uh, women will have great ideas, and the research shows that, from a team perspective, women are much more effective, and at making teams work than men are, because men tend to, butt heads and don't want to, come to a consensus opinion on things, where women tend to be much more open to that kind of thinking. But I've seen it throughout my career where, um, a woman will be, whether it's on a job site or in the office at a meeting, or and their opinion is right. It's the crickets, and what happens is by the second or third meeting, they just don't speak.
That's right.
Right. So they are internally getting the message that, like, your opinion doesn't count. You can't possibly provide any value, and even if you speak up, we're going to ignore it anyway.
Yep.
And I think that there are, there are there great ways of dealing with it? I haven't seen great ways, but I think that you're hitting onto an interesting idea of sometimes it's finding the person in the group who's going to be the ally, who's going to
Hmm.
say, "Hold on, let's hear what Barb has to say," um, and really starting to, you know, create that space
Yeah.
for the opinion to be offered. Sometimes it's finding the most vocal critic and getting that vocal critic to
Yep.
understand,
You're right.
and bring that person around, because it's like it's like a bully in a schoolyard. If you can win over the bully, everyone starts to fall in line behind.
Yes.
And if you can find the one person on that job site who is the most vehemently opposed to women working in the trades, and you can get them to come around and understand that, oh, they can carry, right, they can, I heard on one of your podcasts the idea around learning how to carry a sheet of
Right.
plywood,
Uh-huh.
right, and then having a guy come to you and say, oh, can you, how do you do that, right, sort of thing. So but if you can get the most vocal critic to start to turn in terms of attitude, everyone else starts to fall in line,
Yep.
because that person often is the most vocal, um, in most situations. And
Yeah.
if that's the person people look to, if you can sort of bring that temperature down, it's going to create a much more open environment for women, working, whether it's on the job site or in the office.
Many times it's not so much that it's that vocal person is who people look to. Many times it's just that vocal person, everyone else is tired of fighting as well. And so they just let them continue to be a mouthpiece that they don't even stand up for or they don't even believe anymore, but they are tired of fighting them as well. So they just like ignore them like we all do. But I want to touch on the other side. So we've talked about the men versus women. But I think there's also the curiosity that needs to be developed between women and women. And you mentioned that, there's women in the office that are on the project management, the estimating, the scheduling side, the building project side, and then there are the women in the office that are on the support staff. That are helping us do everything that the company needs to do, right? And I think many times there is a line drawn between those women of, oh, they're not really construction, or those women are hard to get along with, going back and forth, between each other. And I think we can exercise this curiosity muscle in the same fashion, woman to woman, where
Hmm.
it's okay, let's figure out what each other really does and what our opinions of each other are and how we can work together to elevate our success instead of against each other, right? So I think the curiosity muscle works in so many different ways. It doesn't have to just be man to woman to woman. It is, like you said earlier, it's about learning what motivates each individual person um, to hear what you're saying and to buy into that message. And that's what I think we really wanted to get across today is learning how to exercise your own curiosity muscle, but then how to intrigue others to exercise theirs.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to add to that?
Uh, a couple, I think there's a big piece which is around humility, right? Um, and I think that from a curiosity perspective, there's this piece which I think is important, which is around, acknowledging that you don't know everything, right? So curiosity is
Nice.
really right. It's like, and we all like to think of ourselves as, we know everything. I sort of, I cringe a little bit when people say, refer to me as a project management expert, right? I am not an expert on anything. I like to think of it as having expertise, and there's still an ability to learn. And I think that that humility, is goes along with being curious, right?
Mhm.
Because being curious is acknowledging that you don't know everything, that you want to know more, you want to learn more, and I think that the more we can break down those barriers, you mentioned, like, women who are on the project side and on the administration side in the office. Um, Too often that is, I don't think that's a gender issue. I think that is an organizational dynamic where people who are on the support side are seen as cost center, right? It's a cost to the project. It's not a value to the project. They don't, right? They're not seen as being part of the team, even though from a construction perspective, we are pretty simple. We build the work, we bill for the work, we collect the money. If you don't have that support team in the middle that's going to bill for the work, we go out of business,
Right.
right? So we need to start to think about it a little more from a team dynamic, that they're not a cost center, right? It's not us versus them. When somebody who's in accounting says, I need this information to prepare an invoice, that, I've seen invoices. I did work on public works projects. The invoices were sometimes the size of 4 phone books.
Right.
Um, for a younger generation, a phone book is is an anachronism. But 8, 10 pages thick of an invoice, and if you don't have everybody pulling in the same direction, that invoice is not going to go in.
Right.
Your subcontractor is not going to get paid, your vendors are not going to get paid, right? So there's a larger dynamic that we just sort of lose a little bit. We allow for that friction to be created, and we're not acknowledging that everyone's got a role in this, and it's not, the folks in the field do the work, and the folks in the office are basically just, they're just coasting, they're riding our coattails, and I don't think that's ever been the case. But I think that from the perspective of how do we make it better, I think that the more we can get people to acknowledge that they don't know everything, right? Check your ego at the door. Be willing to ask the questions. If you're asking the question, there's likely 4 other people who are afraid to ask the question. So part of it is a little bit of having a little bit of bravery of stepping out front and saying, "Explain to me why we're doing it this way." Right? What's
Yep.
the rationale? Right? Because just be, I always I end many of my workshops with the quote, "The 6 most expensive words in the English language." We've always done it that way. And we hear, right, in the last year or so, AI is going to take over all the construction jobs. AI is not going to take over all the construction jobs. But does it mean we're going to do things the same way 20 years from now as we're doing it now, or we did it 20 years from now? Probably not. So we can't be afraid of the change, but being taking the perspective of we've always done it that way and we're never going to change, is never going to bring, right. That is the opposite of curiosity. That is the fixed mindset, as opposed to a growth mindset, which is, how can we do things better?
Yeah.
Explain to me, right? Give me some ideas. Where can we start to make things better?
Yeah, I'm going to sum it up by saying gaining an appreciation of each person's role, gaining humility for your own knowledge and your own level of understanding. Those are the 2 things that'll set you up for curiosity that will lead to strategic partnerships and enable you to accomplish what you're looking to accomplish. So, looking for appreciation of each person's role, humility, your own humility that will lead to curiosity that leads to those strategic partnerships. So, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Oh,
helping us get there today. I hope that a lot of people take this and think about it and start exercising those muscles to leverage what the curiosity and the strategic partnerships can do. So thank you for joining
yeah.
today, Michael. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure, and I hope that people take it to heart, because I think we have a long way to go. There's a lot of room for us to grow. And I think that the more we can start to do those things, the better we're going to be as professionals, the better our team members are going to be, and the more successful our companies can be.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
If you know someone that could benefit from this particular episode, then share it with them. Or if you want to continue to learn about the untapped and underutilized resources that will take your business to the next level, then follow the podcast. You don't want to miss an episode where we discuss what you needed to hear. And lastly, there is a link in the show notes that will allow you to reach out to me directly if you want to accelerate that learning curve. Thanks for listening. Talk soon.